Yes, let's begin and see where we can go. Hopefully they will be able to log in and get into it. Because most people have those accounts. So in general, they just, I think, sometimes don't know that you can
There
pop
we
into
go.
it and
We have
bypass it.
Ananya. Hi, Ananya. You're in.
Hi, Nanya.
Hello. So let me start by just saying that my name is Bobby Westman, and I'm with the Alberta Dance Alliance. We are a provincial service organization for dance, one of 12 service organizations and cultural industries. Our role has changed over the years, and one of the things that has changed is we do not present our festival anymore, which many of the local artists have participated in. And our role is become more of an advocate and a research support, as well as general services and supports to the community, but research to bring forth to government, to positions of change or power, to make change for community, to empower them and to give them an opportunity to grow. And so that's kind of where we as an organization are now. We're Edmonton based, although we serve everyone across the province. And we're quite connected to the national and international community, mostly national, through the Canadian Alliance of Dance Artists. I just wanted to provide a land acknowledgement. It's something that we have done with great trust with our elders in the community. So I just wanted to say that let's first begin by recognizing Indigenous people as traditional stewards of the land and enduring relationships that exist between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. We are gathered here in Edmonton, online anyway, located within Treaty 6 territory, within Métis homeland and Métis Nation of Alberta Region number 4. We acknowledge this land as traditional territories of many First Nations such as Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Blackfoot. And for us, it's about moving forward with many communities, trying to acknowledge a greater place of peace, respect, and understanding. Cheryl asked me why we were involved in this or why we wanted to. This was brought to us through a few different avenues over the years. We had provided a symposium a couple years ago and started this process, talking about traditional dance and communities and how we support. And some things have come out of that. And then just recently we were approached by Thousand Faces Festival. Thank you to Mark and Aiden, and certainly Sharila, your host today, to talk about some places within traditional classical dance of how we may be of active support or ongoing research support to, again, help empower artists, not just of Indian, but also other places of traditional dance. And so for us, it's about working with community and kind of walking together to figure out what will make their dance really powerful, and what empowers them as artists, individual artists. So thank you very much for allowing us to support this adventure and to be part of Thousand Faces and to have worked with some pretty interesting people in this symposium. So thank you very much. I guess I would also say is we don't have any long-term plans right now of what will come out of this other than research and possibly a document, an ongoing dialogue with community to come up with some position papers, possibly, to offer to people that can make change.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, everyone, for coming today, and thank you, Srila, for hosting, and Aidan for working in the background to get people in as much as possible. I don't want to say too much because time is short, but we definitely appreciate the ADA's support in this. Where I come from in all of this, and where the Thousand Faces Festival comes from in all of this, is that our mission is to help. Is to bring people, artists, and audiences from diverse cultures together to explore the stories at the roots of those cultures, and to find the connections at the roots. And one of the most powerful contributors to the Thousand Faces Festival over the years, due largely to the efforts of, well, Srila and Usha and Malavika and Enakshi Sinha and all kinds of dancers. It's been one of the most represented art forms at the Thousand Faces Festival. And it has occurred to me that it, generally speaking, does not get the support that it should. And of course, that is true of many traditional arts. I don't want to say much more. I want to hear from dancers. But our commitment is, through the CanNatyam Festival, to make something that works better, to put it bluntly. I'm kind of bad at art speak, but that's what I'm after. That's what we're after.
Thanks, Mark. Mark is the artistic director of Thousand Faces Festival and CanNatyam Classical Dance and Symposium presenter.
I'm artistic director of the Thousand Faces Festival, but Malavika is the curator of CanNatyam. Sorry. Get a little mixed up.
And did you want to briefly mention something about the Thousand Faces 10th anniversary?
Yes, it's our 10th anniversary this year. The 10th anniversary of the first festival that we did 10 years ago, the first full-scale festival on Alberta Avenue, which actually Malavika danced in, a show that was created by Srila, featuring Debashish Bhattacharya, and also some local photography and words by Srila. So, 10 years. It's an honor and a privilege to be around that long, and I think that CanNatyam is a perfect celebration of that, or a way to celebrate, or augment the celebrations, or I think it's a thing to celebrate myself, but CanNatyam, that is. But yeah.
And what about a little plug for Myth Country Fair?
Oh yes. Myth Country Fair, October 14th and 15th at the Alberta Avenue Community Centre, which is going to be featuring storytelling by Talolwo Molel, also Iber Paul Guterres, an Afro-Cuban storyteller / playwright, author, and one of the finest pieces to come out of the Thousand Faces Festival, which also involves dance, words, and music. Sebastian Barrera and friends in El Duende, which is an exploration of the spirit of the flamenco, like literally a little spirit that goes into the audience and communicates with the spirit of the performer, and all this stuff that Lorca wrote a huge essay on. Yeah, it's set to be spectacular and fun, multicultural, multidisciplinary, featuring a free multicultural feast. Starts at 6, doors at 6:30, and fun starts at 7, and it's by donation. The suggested donation is $25.
One of the things I love about the Thousand Faces Festival is that it brings the heart of everybody's cultures and the stories from a place that's really precious to people, and it expressed through art. So it's a very nice way of getting to know the city, which is different from attending other festivals because it has that atmosphere of a village that really comes to life. So for anybody who hasn't attended the festival, I think it's something that you should definitely partake in to get the full experience. I just wanted to remind us that we're recording this session. So if you're not speaking, to make sure you keep your microphone muted. And let's use the chat window to type our questions. So it'll be kind of our note taker. So if we have things that come up along, ideas or thoughts that come up, what we're trying to capture today is some of the barriers, the gaps, the challenges, the achievements, what should be recognized more, what we're doing and isn't getting recognized, and maybe there's a way to amp, to amplify what we have achieved and what should be shared across more. Because a lot of times we do operate in our own silos and in our own communities and our own, and we don't necessarily know what's going across. So since we have this platform of being broadcast across the planet, maybe we should pat our backs too and talk about what it is that we have accomplished. So use the chat for that, and it'll be a record that will go into our research. And if we're not able to answer any questions today, then we'll use the second session on October 22nd to address those, and email communications will be ongoing. And
Shreel, I just wanted to remind people too, or to let people know, considering it's being recorded, that this session has actually been funded and brought to you by Canadian Heritage, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and Edmonton Arts Council. And I know that the festival shares some of those sponsors and funders as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that wouldn't happen if we didn't have those support and funders. So I forgot to do that part of it.
Thanks, Bobby. And so stay tuned now for 2 panel discussions by our multi-ethnic peers across Canada and the planet to survey the landscape for presenting traditional performances in Canada. When we were using the language of traditional, it occurred to me that can we even dare to call dance with cultural origins that are presented today as being traditional? So what are our success stories and challenges? Some other questions that came to mind are, what are the trends and emerging, what are the emerging trends and what are the forecasts over the next 5 years for those of us who've been in this landscape for some time? And one of the interesting questions that emerged was, how can we incorporate more dramaturgy into our dance projects? So maybe Shomi, you can help elaborate on that in a bit. And do we even have an audience for attending these traditional dance presentations, like a broader audience? Where should we be meeting and engaging with them? So many of these types of symposiums I see are springing up, and it's a sign that something has to happen. Historically, there's been an absence of a dedicated platform for cultural performances to be presented in an optimal setting with optimal performance times, presentation approaches, set lines, things that you would like to have. So we're trying to identify some of these systemic barriers in recognizing traditional or ritual or sacred cultural arts practices that has led us down this path where we've been presenting our local work in short form or as part of multicultural item numbers or as hybrid contemporary style collaborations or perhaps on community stages by clubs and associations that are less than the full potential of what we would like to present. So we would like to see a path for dancers taking it up as professional artists so that they can flourish. And there's no reason why we should not be able to be given that equal opportunity. So the way this is going to work, and I know we're still working on getting Usha and Ria in the room. They're in Calgary right now, about to get ready for their performance this evening. So um, they are working on it.
Usha's
Usha's here.
I'm
Usha.
good morning, everybody. Well, I'm in Calgary and I have a show tonight. Sheila, the question which you are asking is phenomenal, and I have so much to say, but I don't have that much time. Very short, I will say, hi, Bobby, how are you? And so, hi, Marla, Tamanna, everybody, Ananya, Mark, and Malvika, and everybody, please. Amy, well, my experiences so far is beautiful, tremendous, excellent in my traditional work as well as in my contemporary work. Of course, I don't break the bridge, but I want to be in that only. But just now, from the last 2 months, I had a little challenge because my dancers didn't get the visa. But you people will be very happy to know they all got the visa now. And I'm successfully touring my show. I did in Toronto. The house was full, standing ovation, and people were really very keen to see the show because from the last 3 years they didn't see anything very much. And we performed in Lata, with Lata in Sampradaya. I must say that was one of my, after COVID, one of my very beautiful experience. And over the years, I have been working with Thousand Faces, with Mark, with Bobby, with Malvika, with everybody. Sheila, I got a wonderful, wonderful experience. I don't know what to say. And challenges comes, and but we have to face those. I'm not that young now, but I try to perform my little ones, my grown-up girls, and professional artists in a very successful manner. And funding, I'm getting funding to host them, and they have been going very well. Just now, my dancers couldn't get the visa, so uh, um, we missed 2, 3 shows, but they got it now. So maybe I'm going to present them next year. But at the moment, we are doing all this. I got a wonderful dancer from UK named Sham Dathani, a contemporary Kathak dancer, a student of Kumudri Lakia's student, Urja, and another girl I got it from Ottawa. Name is Palak, beautiful dancer from, she learned from Winnipeg. So
But
challenges.
Usha, can you tell us about the a bit about the dance we're going to be seeing at CanNatyam? I think this is for a different show.
Yeah. I'm going to show Darbari Kathak. Darbari Kathak means dances from Mughal, dances from Darbar in code, how the dances used to start with the greetings as well as the technique and abhinay, means expression piece. I'm going to show that. And the first dance is Sufi, actually, with the light I'm presenting. So that is what I'm presenting with Kenya.
You're using a lot of background projections and lighting.
Yeah.
How are these going to be enhancing the performers? Is there going to be some interaction between the dancers and and the background images, or does it set the mood and the context?
Yeah, it is with the context, Sheila, but at the same time, dancers, the one they are dancing on the stage are not on screen. Okay, they are not showing at like they are dancing with the screen portrait. No, they are dancing on the stage. The background we are showing the Mughal era, like the tombs and different places where it used to happen, to give the idea of the Mughal and to give the idea of traditional. That's totally a traditional piece, traditional Kathak, which used to be in Mughal time. So there is no interaction, no disturbance with the dancers at all.
I'm just curious, Amy, how do you think that I'm going to get a little technical for this first part, and then we'll shift into different other kinds of experiences. But Amy, I'm wondering if you can share what the experience of putting these projections up, setting a context is from like from an audience perspective. Like, will the images be will be showing up on the artists' like faces? How does that work? How will that work?
Well, we haven't exactly figured out where everything's going to be. We're working on that. So to make sure that the dancers aren't interfering with the image isn't interfering with the dancers, we'll want to either project on the back of our screen, or we'll want to put our projector up quite high. I mean, it's just sort of all angles like sunlight. But if I've got, you know, a dancer and a screen, as long as my projector light is coming over the head of the dancer, the little triangle of projection light will go onto our screen and not the person in front of it. If I have to project from the front, and if I'm projecting from the back, then it's just fine either way. It doesn't matter how high or low it goes. From the drawings that I've seen of the theater space we're going to be in, I think we can probably work from the back. I also know they have a very high grid, so there's a lot of upward space that exists in that space. So I'm not expecting that to be too much of a challenge. The biggest challenge I see with the particular space we're in is we don't have a particularly large screen. And so I'm working on some drawings to show our dancers what we have available, and we're gonna have to figure out how to make it beautiful, because we're working within the context of the space that we have.
And to create perspective.
Yeah.
In the interest of keeping with our schedule, I'm going to move on to our next panelist. And so that our artists, if they need to head off to their shows, they can drop off the call. But I encourage you to leave your comments, and if you have more to add, just put them into the chat before you sign off. And all the best for your performance tonight, Usha and team. Is Ria with you there?
Yes, yes.
Hi, Ria.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
A quick synopsis of what you're going to be presenting.
Sure. So I was lucky to be supported by the Edmonton Arts Council a couple of years ago for a career development grant, where I was able to work online with artists from India. My performance will differ quite a bit from Nani's, in that it's going to be a bit more technique based. No, I don't have to worry about projections or anything like that, but rather I like to work more so with light and sound. So I'm excited to work with Amy a bit and just, you know, figure out where we can do, you know, different features and so on and so forth, just to highlight the different movements. I think Nani's lighting will be a bit more facial expression focused, whereas my pieces are a bit more technique based. So it'll just be an interesting contrast, I think, playing off of each other. That being said, I'm hoping to perform a piece that is a little bit more expression focused. So again, it'll just make for a nice contrast within the 3 pieces I plan to perform.
So what does the lighting designer have to look for in your pieces? What are the key features in the movements and
so usually when we're working with lighting designers, I start kind of with just the mood of the piece. If there's a bit of a storyline, I like to start there, get their, you know, artistic creativity behind what we're doing, and then focus more on the okay, well, I'm doing, you know, this bit on this part of the stage, how can we highlight that? I'm doing this bit on this part of the stage, how can we highlight that? So on and so forth. So yeah, it'll a lot, I think, will depend on how much time we have in the actual space. But I know a lot of it will be spent, you know, figuring out those projections and what the other things you said for the other students' performances.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for the artists?
Well, thank you very much. I think we have to leave.
Okay.
We are going for the rehearsal, and all the best for the rest of the symposium. And I'll take your blessings and everything. Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great show tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Thanks, Mark.
And you're doing something really fun. You're working with live musicians for your CanNatyam performance. Have you worked out how music and lights will be incorporated into your performance? Give us a bit of a rundown and what you're thinking.
Yeah, we've just got started, so yeah, we're getting there. But it's really interesting for me to work with live musicians. Indian classical dances, that's the way it was earlier on. So we always used to have live music. I hate to call it accompaniment because they are an equal part in the presentation. So, and having live music adds a lot of charm, in the sense it gives us a lot more freedom to improvise, to experiment, even on the go. So it definitely is a lot more challenging and exciting at the same time. And when I see a production be it with or without live music, in this case with live music, everything has to come together as a whole, is what I see it. Be it the music aspect of it, the dance, the lights, the stage, everything. So it has to kind of seamlessly blend into a smooth visual for an audience watching it. So I always lay emphasis on kind of, incorporating the musical aspect of any production into the choreography itself very well, along with the stage setup or the light design or whatever we are using. Because we use it in varying capacities depending upon the space you're performing in, or how much access you get to, time access you get to meet with the technical team and things like that, right? So for me, it is very important for all these to be kind of seamlessly incorporated. The normal traditional stage setting that Indian dances have evolved from, it's either temple or court performances. So we still kind of keep those stage settings in mind, or use it, where the musical accompaniment is placed on like either stage right or stage left, and there is that space available to use for the dancer. But what I'm trying to do here is kind of try to incorporate them into the visuals of the performance itself, where, as I said, I don't see it as an accompaniment as such, they're in equal part. So I will be talking to Amy, who's designing the lights and the stage space and everything for us, to how best we can incorporate them into the visuals as well. There are two aspects. There's the dance visuals, where we are all over the stage, and the musical team who are stationary. So we have to balance both and still present it in a very seamless way. So I'm throwing a lot of things at Amy, and like, I'm like, Amy, tell me what to do. This is what I want. Make it work. So however you want to, give it to me, kind of a thing. So it's, and also, as Ria also mentioned, the lighting kind of mainly starts off, the starting point is the mood of whatever you're presenting with, right? It could be a storyline, or it could just be like a theme without too much of a storyline as such. So to be honest, that is another challenging thing that I'm doing here is the theme that I chose is one of the forces of nature. So you can build a lot of storyline into it. At the same time, it might not have a very defined storyline because it's a huge topic. It's a very wide topic. So go ahead.
I was wondering, show me if you might have a response to how you can synthesize all these elements of abstract story and music and lighting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I really love hearing is how you're thinking about it holistically and not just the dancers do this, the music does that, and the light has its own purpose. But I think when you see that all of these elements are tools to express whatever the story, the vision that you have as a director and as a choreographer. And I think when you see for me, as in kind of if my background is in theater, I love looking at all these pieces are different characters in the play. And how do these characters, how do they represent the story that's coming across? And so if you can, it's the central question I always ask is, what do I want the audience to feel? What experience do I want them to undergo through this process, and how can these different tools help me express that? Whether it's a single solo dancer on stage or a dancer with a musician, with lighting, with sound, with special effects, depending on but all of it has to tie into the central vision of the show itself. So if it is the forces of nature, how does the sound express that? How does the musician express that in harmony with the dancer itself? And so it's a balancing act that a director and choreographer kind of have to shape together and get everyone on board. And I think it's, in terms of, I guess, from this aspect for here, the dramaturgy of it, it's trying to get everyone to kind of understand that central vision, but also fill in the gaps of the concept of how is this going to be relayed to an audience? How can we take these traditional forms and express it using modern tools? I don't know if that's a little bit too abstract, but maybe.
No, absolutely right, Shomya, especially when you said it's a balancing act, it for sure is. Like, I'm just going to pick up on the question that I have here as to what suggestions you might have for dancers in approaching a collaboration like this with a designer and a music team, or, everything has to be thought of right from the initial stages is what I would say. It's not, no aspect is just an add-on, at least in terms of, your stage, your lights, be it your dramaturgy or the music aspect. None of those are an add-on. It really has to be thought of and incorporated right from the get-go. Otherwise, it definitely ends up looking like an add-on, which I don't want it to be, and that's not the way it should be seen, especially when we're talking about traditional art and presenting it to a wider audience. I feel all of us need to kind of keep that in mind. And especially now, there's so much of so many things available in terms of, technology, and there's so many things at our disposal which we can tap into. So we definitely should think on those lines and start from the get-go, because the other day I was having a conversation with Amy and I'm like, look, I still haven't completed everything, but I want you to be involved from this stage. So you put in your ideas. This is what I have in mind. So bring everything together, the balancing act that you were talking about.
Definitely. I think it all starts from, again, just that central vision that the choreographer or the director has, and then seeing how can that be expressed, and starting maybe with the solo dancer itself. Then it is not adding to that, but seeing how will the music then play in harmony with what the dancer is doing, in a sense. And it's kind of like, for me, I'm maybe thinking of it kind of like Michelangelo, in terms of, you have this big hunk of rock, and then you start chiseling away until you get the essential truth behind what you're trying to say. And I think if you can see it beyond what you know as a dancer or as an actor or as even a lighting designer, and seeing how can we work together to bring out the beauty inside the rock, in a sense. And so it's knowing that it is always a collaboration, and being open to these multiple perspectives into expressing this story. But I think all of it starts from that vision.
You need a lot of
Mm.
time to do it. You can do it within the whatever time constraints you have.
For sure, yeah.
Good conversation. Thanks, Malavika. We're going to let's move over to Sopanam, Canada. Yes, we have Anupama and Uni from Sopanam, Canada here. You've got your workout cut out for you in your Kathakali performance. This is the first time we're going to be presenting this in Edmonton. It's almost like a divine opera in a Sanskrit language. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you'll be communicating this universal and relatable love story from the Mahabharata to a diverse Western audience. Welcome.
So thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Actually, when we got invited, we were thinking of different stories, and then we selected this simple story that everybody could understand. It's a very simple story. It's not complicated at all. And it actually, thinking about the story, it's like a love message through a swan, golden swan. So how we are going to communicate the story to the diverse audience is we don't have live music. As Malavika ji just said, we would prefer live music, but it's a barrier here. So that's one of the barriers that we have identified. We do have musicians, but we don't have a complete, set of percussionists performing or musicians. Hopefully in future years, we can incorporate that as well. But for the time being, we are using the audios, recorded music. So communication is through this music. It's actually like the verses are in Sanskrit as well as in Mani Pravalam, which is a mixture of Malayalam and Sanskrit. And again, the text is sung through the recorded audio. So it's very difficult, challenging for the audience to understand. So what we have done is, we have created a PowerPoint to the verses. So it could, at least the audience can understand as the scene moves along. And the other option is, since it's an opera, so it would be like easy to understand hand gestures. We're trying to incorporate that as well to the audience. Say, for example, like the costume as well as the gestures of the character. That would actually help the audience to understand the story better. So these are some of the aspects that we are trying to work on to. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Is there a lag? Because my internet like connection is very unstable.
Mine is also.
I hope. Yeah, I hope I was able to communicate and.
Yeah, no, we can hear you. Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. Yeah. So, and again, I think we have been working with Srila and Amy to, incorporate dramaturgy and simplify our content so that the audience can understand better.
Shomi, did you want to add your thoughts to this?
In terms of, I don't know if it's necessarily simplifying what you're doing, but more so coming to the heart or soul of what you're doing, that the audience won't need any translation, in a sense. And so I think there's a way to, like we were talking about before, about finding that balance with what's available to you to express what your story is asking of you, but also I think trust your own artistic knowledge as well as what you want to express, and know that without, I know it's easy to think that if the audience doesn't understand the language, or if they don't have the same cultural background, they might be confused by what you're doing. But I would say 9 times out of 10, an audience is willing to go wherever you want them to. And if you believe in it enough, if you trust in it enough, and express the story using all the tools that are available to you, I think we can get to the heart of what you're trying to say, and any audience will connect to it, depending. But if you have to, as long as you figure out through, again, that vision of what you want the story to be, you can tailor it down using what's available. Like if you don't have live musicians, how can we make the music the most, through recorded music, through the whatever sound system we have, how can we make it the most clear and basically in harmony with what you're doing as a dancer, to get that across. And again, I think the tools today there's so many at our disposal that we can use. So I think I find it's not about doing less, but it's about getting specific with what do you want to get across? What do you want this audience to feel? And how can we use the tools to get that? Yeah.
Thanks, Shelley. Amy, would you like to jump into this and describe a bit about this idea of like keeping it simple and allowing the story and the performance to speak for itself? How will you approach this particular piece, do you think?
For sure. It's a good question, and it's interesting because sometimes great lighting design, you're like, wow, look at those lights. And sometimes great lighting design, you don't notice that the lighting design exists. And it just shifts people's, almost like a camera in a video. It just shifts people's focus to where it needs to be. And it just, you know, very subtly can shift mood, and people don't even notice that it happened. And I feel like for this piece, that's my aim. I kind of want people to forget, you know, that there's any lighting existing at all, which is going to be in sharp contrast to, I think, some of what Malavika and Ananya want to do, where we're going to say, oh my gosh, like, look at that really great lighting special effect. And I think here we're going to just, and it'll be really neat within that piece. And I think in this piece, we're looking more to just really support the focus of what they're wanting. I think one of the challenges we have with that is the consideration of some sort of translation. So, you know, they've had sort of a screen with a PowerPoint before, and we've been discussing a little bit, as you sort of mentioned, it's kind of operatic. And when we're talking about bringing this sort of dance within Edmonton, that's something that's actually very familiar to this type of Western audience. Like, you know, subtitles or a bit of words within a movie or an opera context isn't strange. So I think that if we look at that form and use that to inform what we're doing with this piece, we'll be able to add words if that's desired, without it being too distracting. And I mean, this, you know, I've read the story, and it's very meaningful and beautiful, and it's also not super complex. And so, you know, I think especially with Shomi's help, we can sort of like distilling, you know, like making coffee or distilling something, we can get it down to the very neat form that we need to express what we're trying to convey to the audience. And I can shift, you know, I can shift mood really subtly to help convey some of that emotion. And, you know, if we need to have words, we'll find a way to do that gently. And I think it'll be beautiful.
Uni, do you have any thoughts to add to this conversation?
Yes, like I know the PowerPoint projection and everything that will distract the audience, because then you're, you know, fixing another screen or so. Just when we were talking, like Aiden was sending a message in the Zoom. I support that actually. You know, at least when you can describe the cues and the context of the story in at least a one pager and distribute to the audience. They spend like maybe a couple of minutes to read, then sit in the, you know, audience. They can understand the story, what is going on, right? Because the language is entirely different, and the gestures are. It's not. Some gestures are not universal. When we act, when the Kathakali dancers act. So, and the lighting, of course, lighting, I send you a sample, if you remember. And so lighting, Amy can, you know, definitely help us. Yeah, I have nothing more to add, actually. Maybe.
Then why don't we move to Ananya, because you're performing Odyssey dance, which is also when I imagine Odyssey, I always imagine statues that come to life and start to move and start to speak. Why don't you give us a rundown about what you're trying to do, and we'll continue this focus on lighting and lighting and music, and how you work with it.
Yes, thank you, Srila. First of all, namaskar, everybody. Thank you very much for this incredible opportunity to be a part of something this magical. So I feel very honored to present my art form here. So my heartfelt thanks. And it's very interesting to hear the perspectives of all such eminent artists on this panel, and I'm very much aligned with a lot of the inputs. And yes, to your point, Srila, the popular narrative about Odissi is, it's very much bringing temple figurines to life, because it is a temple dance form, as is most of or many of the Indian classical dance forms, but this one particularly in its revival period, was related heavily to the figurines that were sculpted onto some of the traditional temples in the province of Odisha in India. And especially in Odissi and what we've seen over the years, that it kind of went through a period of turmoil because of the British invasion and a lot of societal repercussions, where the art form was at first completely removed or like completely, I wouldn't say removed, I would say like people were not allowed to perform it anymore, or people who did perform it were not very held to a very high standard in society. So through the efforts of a lot of gurus, we were able to kind of bring it back to the commercial platform. Now, because of that lack of exposure, a lot of the presentation aspects of this dance form are, I feel, still somewhat lagging behind compared to more popular dance forms such as like Bharatanatyam or Kathak. They've gotten a little bit more world exposure, and the gurus and the dancers have really kind of improvised on how they present the art form on a world stage compared to Odissi. But now, more lighting, some background effects, etc., are being incorporated. However, if you kind of, go back and you have these conversations, a lot of the gurus will kind of really stick to be like, no, it's traditional and you don't mess with it and da 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 da. And it's a very it's a traditional way of looking at the art form. But like you said, to make it more relatable for world audiences and to really bring this beautiful art form in front of Western audiences, it's important to use the tools that we have at our disposal, as Malavika ma'am mentioned. So in terms of lighting, because there's a lot of poses and a lot of circular movements, a lot of there can be some challenges because we're going, the motions are very circular, where compared to linear, where it's kind of easier to track it with lighting a little bit. But in my conversations with Amy, I've kind of been really like one-off, which I really apologize about, Amy, but I will be mindful. But I kind of, took some examples. Hey, Amy, I want to do this, I want to do that. Especially as a solo artist, right? You have to make sure that your story is coming across, your emotions are coming across, and of course, your dance part of it is also highlighted with all these, extra support that we will get through lighting and sound. But at the same time, I have to kind of, sometimes really ground myself that, okay, all this is really cool and it looks really cool. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the traditional essence of the art form itself, because at the end of the day, we're reciting prayers, we're reciting stories, we're communicating very deep emotions that the dancer feels while performing these pieces. So even as a dancer, we don't want to get distracted too much with the external technicalities.
Ananya,
So
I
it's
have a question
yes.
for you.
Yeah.
Do you by any chance script your work to highlight what part needs to be zoomed in on, what is like a traditional aspect that needs a little bit of interpretation? Do you do that kind of a written breakdown of what your performance is?
Yes, absolutely. Especially because like my with my performance for CanNatyam, I am doing like a Ganesh Vandana to start, which is kind of a standard repertoire staple. It's basically offering salutations to Lord Ganesha. So a lot of, and then, kind of moving on to the other pieces, and they're all storylines originally written in Sanskrit. So to have an accurate, however, a well communicated translation is imperative for the audience to relate, because to the panel we've been discussing, and I've been listening to this a lot, and unless we have, like for Indians or people of South Asian descent who have a lot of knowledge about our cultural backgrounds, some stories are very relatable because we've read the Mahabharata, we've seen the Ramayana on TV, or we've heard our grandmothers and our mothers and our parents talk about all our cultural, specific to Hinduism in this particular example. But for the Western audiences, they're like, okay, we need to completely understand the story from scratch. What are you really trying to communicate? So in our previous discussions, with Mark and Malavika ma'am and Amy in my previous consultations, it was brought up that it would be a really great idea to have some sort of subtitling in the background as the performance is continuing. However, very subtly, presented so that it doesn't actually take away from the presentation itself. Because in Indian classical dance, the dancer is using so much of their expressions and their hand movements to communicate everything. We don't want additional elements to take away from the piece itself.
There was a question in the chat that I saw that said, is there an alternative to using a lot of subtitles and program and detailed program notes to get the stories across? I know that we use narration as well, voiceover narration or narration. Is there perhaps another way to make sure that the storyline is coming across?
Yeah, I mean, as creative people, you can go in several different directions, right, about how you want to present it. I'm still a student, so perhaps I haven't mastered those creativities, and I'll probably need a lot of guidance from Malavika ma'am or some of my other gurus. But as an example, traditionally what we've done is we would print out pamphlets of sorts that'll kind of have the explanation of the program itself. And we really try to avoid direct narration during the presentation, just because it is already so music and song heavy that like any additional narration in between the period can really kind of take away from the item itself. So as for the audience, like sometimes there is a handout, and then prior to the performance, we do a short narration about what the piece is going to be, so that the audience is aware about what's about to happen. So there is a big, there's a prelude of music before the actual piece begins, and we usually use that space, that time space, to really talk about what the presenter is about to perform.
Does somebody want to respond to that? Show me, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, no, one thing I'm thinking about too is all these classical forms where it was about that balance of art and story, and to me, I think it's finding the rasa, finding and letting the audience feel that, and that's when the translation happens universally through the music, through the dance. You don't need words. Music is the words, in a sense, if you know what I mean. And I think there's certain maybe cultural things that someone from North America might miss, but I think that's okay, to be honest. I think it's okay to miss these things and just feel what the presentation is offering. in a sense. But I think if you do give them something in the program, but that describes the story so we get an idea, I think leave it up to the audience to dig deeper if they want to. But I think if we get too caught up in trying to translate every word, we lose the sense of what we're presenting, I think. So I think there's a balance of letting go and trusting your art, trusting your expression. And, but if you do need to incorporate things, kind of what I was talking about in the chat a little bit, was when you are projecting things, don't see it as a functional translation or an explanation of what you're doing. It's an opportunity to go further in your design, going further in expressing the story with a word or with a phrase, and seeing how does that, when I project this word onto the stage, what does it do psychologically or even emotionally? And how does that add to the story itself? And so if you can see that as an extension, just as you're doing with the music, just as you're doing with the lighting, how does that other little element add to your story to get the meaning and the truth that you want it to get across? So and again, be like subtlety and using these things sparingly is always, they're just little things like highlighting things when you need that little extra bit of expression that you can't express as a dancer, in a sense. So anyway.
Thanks, Shomi. I see three hands up. So let's start with Mark, and then Amy, and then Bobby.
Right. Excellent. I'll lower my hand then. Oh, I thought I was unmuted this whole time. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree that there's so much there. There's so much to be trusted. So much that is poured in. So much to feel. So much to take in. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, speaking as a mythologically crazy Westerner, why South Asian dance, classical dance, Indian classical dance has appealed to me ever since I first saw it in 1988 or whatever, and it just grabbed me, like physically. It was an amazing experience. I'd never felt anything like it before out of a performance quite. And it continued to do so. However, if I may use the example of Malavika's Mahamaya, I knew generally that the story was about fighting demons, one of whom, if you cut them, the drop of blood would fall and then more demons would sprout up. I knew it was about fighting demons when I first actually saw it at the Thousand Faces Festival, and I knew a little more than that about it. But at a certain point, we were creating an edited video of it, and I was working with Malavika on that, and Lauren McCarthy, who was a fabulous editor, and we simply put in very subtle things about what happens in this section. One phrase. It's on the screen for a little bit, it fades out. And I have to say that, as somebody more educated than most Westerners are in Hindu mythology, more educated in CanNatyam and other forms than most Westerners are, it was a revelation to me to get the basic story points. It let my imagination play that much wilder and more fervently. It was, in terms of an experience of the drama of dance drama, it was much more powerful for me. And I fully understand and embrace if anybody thinks that it's, sort of chunky and distracting. But I think that it can be done effectively without being chunky and distracting. And that the essence of that effectiveness may well be simplicity. you know?
I just had a tiny bit to add to what Mark said. All the Indian classical dances are based on a factor called rasotpatti. That means evoking the emotion of the mood that we are trying to represent, that we are trying to feel as artists in the audience. So all the classical dances are based on it, and it's a big part. Our dances are built around that dance and music. So as Mark was mentioning, it's kind of almost subtlety is the key, because we don't want to take away from it. So, and I'm sure there are a lot of creative ways to explore. That project where we were working on editing, presenting Mahamaya as an edited video version was very interesting, because all of us got to learn a lot, because there was a lot of drama happening on stage. And at the same time, we didn't want to kind of, narrate everything, like give away before the audience could get to it. At the same time, we wanted to make sure they're in line they're with us walking through the whole story. So it was, the subtlety and the balance of how we use things, I guess, is the key, because the major aspect that rasotpatti, it's there for all of the classical dance forms. That kind of we should not take away from that. That's important to keep it in mind.
However, I would say from my experience as an audience member, that aspect of it was intensified, because I knew that what was coming up in the next section was the place where the Trinity create the ultimate power in the universe, Shakti. And I went, oh, this is that point. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, I'm sure that a lot of people thoroughly versed in Hindu culture, in Hindu mythology, or even well versed in Hindu mythology and dance would get to that point well before I would, and wouldn't need the cues that I needed to do that. However, I'm just saying from my experience, the emotional power was greater. It was already massive, but it was refined and leavened and made more precise.
It kept the audience with what's happening.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, they're with what's happening already, because it's amazing, right? but it told the story in a way better. It just gave context. I'll shut up now and let other people talk.
Bobby, what would you like to say?
First of all, I always want to make sure I'm speaking specifically from a white, westernized perspective, growing up as a ballet dancer many, many, many years ago. But I have a feeling that it's there will be a transition at some point in time. It really resonated me with what Shomi said about trust your art, trust your story, and trust your audience, because I think that when I look at other art forms from other traditional dances, including European style dance, I see that place of subtle education, starting to learn more stories. We're starting to understand other people's culture better, other people's stories. It's become globally a bit wider in our understanding and knowledge and appreciation, that I wouldn't be surprised, maybe not in my lifetime, but I wouldn't be surprised if a traditional South Asian Indian story, I'm never sure exactly what term I should use, but if that story doesn't become as neutralized or as popularized as the Nutcracker in the ballet. And when that happens, or even prior to that, I think there will be a freedom, a sensibility that the art will speak for itself, and other diverse cultures won't need to be treated with such tender gloves. Personally, this is just me personally, and I have been exposed to a lot within Alberta. I've been very, very privileged to be exposed to a lot of different dance cultures, and specifically classical Indian dance. And I I have benefited from learning the different stories, not like a child that would grow up as an Indian child, but I've been able to appreciate those stories, and I love it when the art just speaks for itself. To me, that's the most magical place in the world, that we trust it in contemporary modern dance. We trust it, and often there is no story at all. But we as an audience take something back from that we then interpret ourselves. And I think that place needs to feel a place to have freedom for performing artists now in the dance, as well as in the future. It's maybe something we need to find a way to encourage our next generation as well. I don't know if that made sense at all, but.
Oh, absolutely it did. Ananya, what would you like to add? You wanted to respond right away. Oh, you're muted, Ananya.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm actually very thankful to Bobby for saying this, because at the end of the day, the whole point of the performance is not to just end it there, right? We want the audience to not only feel and absorb and, you know, relish in what they experience, but also take away something, take away a piece of the performance with them when they head back. So exactly to Bobby's point, like, you know, we want it to be so impactful that, you know, people go back and Google about, okay, what was the story Mahamaya about? Who are the main characters? Who is Goddess Kali? Who is the Holy Trinity, etc., etc. Because we as South Asians, when, I mean, and I mean no offense whatsoever, but like when, you know, we came here, like I'll have to, okay, what's the Nutcracker story? I don't know about this. So I Googled it and I learned about it, and then I kind of, you know, enjoyed it. So I think that element is so critical that you pointed that out, that yes, we will trust our art form. We've obviously trained in it. We've honed our skills to communicate the way we want to, but obviously we'll be understanding that this could be a little bit more of an alien territory for some of our Western audience members. So we'll give them, you know, little treats here and there, but overall we want them to become more curious, so that they take this essence back and then they want to watch more, they want to see more of it. And I think that should, or that will be at least my intention with my performance. That's it.
Amy, you wanted to say something?
I do. I think sort of listening to all of you, what I'd really like us to find is a balance. I think that, you know, absolutely the dance and the music is so evocative just purely on its own. And we also, you know, as a Westerner, that having some of the context is super helpful to me. And so if we can give, I loved Shomi's, I don't know if he said it out loud in as we were chatting, or if it was just in the little written chat, but the word art idea, and just like breadcrumbs is what you made me think of, Ananya. If we can give people like little crumbs of context, so just to help tell the whole story and to support it, that would be really cool. And I don't know if we want to say it with written word on screen, with someone speaking a little bit, or with what's just in the program. I think it'll depend on the piece and who's telling what, to see how that fits best. And in terms of subtlety and how we tell story, I have noticed as a designer over the years that if you have like a lot of words all the time, our eyes are just so trained to stare at them. So we really don't want to leave words all the time on stage. At least personally, I don't like doing that. Because I find, like, if someone says, oh, spray paint, you know, this word on the backdrop of a set, I will always sort of be like, can we just try something else? Because I find that it just pulls my focus so much, and I want the focus to be on the dancers.
And we don't want to turn it into like a comic book effect.
No, I mean, graphic novels are fantastic, but not here. That's not our goal.
And there is something to be said about how the eyes and ears and senses are drawn into an expression, and there's that's why I think I hold dance very critically in my imagination, because I feel that it aspires to um, um, perfection in so many different on so many different levels, from the sound, from the expression, from like just muscular movements, and you know, the architectural form of a body. There's so many things going on that um, I think somebody said that that really zooming in on the focal um, piece of the expression, I think, will synthesize everything. Like, it only takes a blip to communicate a whole message. Like, just one look sometimes says it all. And so I think if everybody on the team is on the same page about where that moment takes place, then I think we've done our jobs. And so, having said that, I think one of the needs that we have as dance producers and presenters is to be able to spend a little bit of that time to capture those moments or identify those moments, whether it happens on a script, whether it happens in a rehearsal, whether it happens um, in a staged reading or a workshop prior to a performance, or more development opportunity. Um, it might be interesting to suggest that in addition to having a project grant, that we have some kind of a development opportunity to work with teams to understand the story, understand the culture, and um, and then in the film world, we have assistive technologies that makes work accessible to different people. So maybe there is room for engaging more people who do interpretive work. I know that for presenting classical music and dance, we've experimented with having a community person come and give you a brief uh, explanation before the show, that this is what you're going to expect, this is what you're going to see, this is what you should look for, this is what makes this art form beautiful, and then people go into the show and have it presented. So there are ways to um, set expectations and fill in those gaps. We are approaching 10 o'clock for our second panel. I would like us to have a bit of a break. Bobby, do you want to say something before we take the break?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment quickly on what you had just said. And I think for me, it's a three-prong kind of approach over many, many, many years. One, there's a place of education for younger students that are coming up through the ranks of, if these are areas we want to develop and work through, I think there's a place for studios to start to look at creation and what other components need for creation, which also then leads me into the professional artists of today and more opportunities for connection and networking, and knowing who those other components are, whether that be lighting designers or dramaturge or musicians or whomever it's going to be, that will add to, recording, video, filmmakers, all the different components that you may have an interest in, finding ways for greater networking and learning opportunities for professional artists. So maybe not just always project oriented, but oriented towards learning in creation. And then I think that needs to be provided a recognition to the funders, that to be able to develop our art form, we need that kind of support, that kind of ability to go and learn on our own playing field, on our own, the way we want to learn and grow organically. But there seems to be a real need, because the dance artists themselves have reached a pinnacle of where they are striving for excellence, and it just feels like that we haven't really been able to find a way to surround them with other components that they may need. So I think that, yes, there's a responsibility for young students, but that can't happen until we provide that networking and gathering and funding for professional artists to know what they actually want in their own art making.
I wanted to add to that there's a lot of local South Asian dancers in Edmonton who are not in the room today, but they're eagerly on the sidelines, wanting to figure out a space for them. So I think it's really important what you said about networking opportunities and finding a space. I really feel that there's a desire and a need for more inclusiveness in how we
Hello.
how we proceed. Oh, and I guess we're now shifting into our second panel. Let's just what we'll take a moment to leave more questions and suggestions and keep this an open forum for discussion, because none of what we're talking about today is going to be thorough, but just some chance to get some thoughts across and take more time to contemplate and give direction. So we're going to hop into the second panel to hear perspectives from success stories, Canadians in their traditional dance, in their fields of traditional dance, will share with us what they've been experiencing and where we need to go from here, and maybe get a sense of, from their experience, to see what the future has in store. But if you need to take a break right now for 5 minutes, I would say let's just take a bit of a pause, a bio break, and let's continue in 5 minutes. Does that sound good for everybody? To have a stretch? So see you in 5 minutes. Hi, Justin. Hi, Darka. I see that you're in the room. I just wanted to say hello. And we'll just give ourselves 5 minutes to just have a stretch and refocus.
Sounds good.
Hi, Darka. Hi, Justin.
Hi, Bobby. Nice to see you.
You too. You too.
Hello.
Hello, Justin. Hi, Justin.
Hello, Bobby. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah,
How did school go?
it was good.
Good.
Yeah, it was. So I haven't been in school so long, so it was, a little strange getting used to everything, and uh,
Yes.
yeah, but it was good to have like, I guess the theory background of
Mm-hmm.
what I do and kind of understanding that, just because my arts admin comes from like mentorships and
Yes.
companies and from all over. And so it was great to kind of see the things I know and be able to specifically categorize where some things come from and be like, you know what, I could have done that better 2 years ago when we did that thing. This is why
Right.
it did specifically work. If I understood that a little bit better, then
Yeah.
maybe I would have been able to make. So it was really great just to kind of be refreshed and just have that time to kind of be like a kid again and just like dream
Mm-hmm.
and make those bizarre productions and those bizarre companies every other week and just have fun. Yeah.
Good.
So it was great. Yeah.
Good. Sometimes you need that place of just readjusting for
Yeah.
growth. So good for you.
What program did you
Yeah.
take, Justin?
I did the arts and culture management and leadership.
Nice.
That's through
Mhm.
That program 30 years ago.
Right.
But
Who's speaking? Sorry, I can't see
it's
who's
Darka.
speaking.
It's Darka.
Oh, okay.
Answers.
Hi.
Yeah, I took the program and finished in 1989.
Oh, okay.
And it's developed a lot since then.
Yeah, it's really great. I did the 1 year of the certificate, just
Yeah, me too.
kind of see what the program is and see what it's about, see if I want to further it or not. But yeah, so now I'm entering my master's on
Oh, nice.
the other side. So I'm doing the whole art side of stuff. So I thought, you know what, I'm so burnt out, and COVID is, I have no more energy for COVID to try to help navigate COVID and try to figure out what's going to happen after COVID. I'm like, once things have settled, I'll come back. But let me just use this time to go to school finally and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
do that and just relax and gain some momentum and some strategizing. And yeah, so yeah, it's been great. And I'm moving to Calgary this weekend, so I'm quite excited and also so nervous again, because I've kind of through certificate programs and mentorships and internships, and so that's what I kind of built my career out of. So the institutionalized part of education and arts is, I'm gonna see how it goes.
Yeah. Oh, you'll do fantastic.
Absolutely. And how are you, Darka?
I'm good. We're just finishing up our 60th anniversary tour, which was supposed to be in 2019. Just finishing that up this fall, and I'll be glad when it's done, to be honest. It's been a long slog, but
Yes.
But yeah, we're going to Mississauga Living Arts Center for a few shows, coming back to Edmonton to do some student matinees and some filming and one evening show. And then we're going to finish up in Calgary, which we haven't been to Calgary for about 12 years. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we're doing well.
Good. Good. It's been a very difficult time too, with COVID and everything that's going on in Ukraine. It's been in general, there's been a lot of place of reflection and difficulty, and Indigenous communities having reconciliation and going through Indigenous children's issues with the school. And I think there's a lot of place for change and a lot of potential for change, but also it's been very, very difficult on people.
One really positive thing today is we're starting, it's our first day of our 22-23 Shimka school session. And we've got over 230 kids who've registered. So our numbers are coming up again, which is really nice.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have some new kids from Ukraine who've joined us, which is really exciting.
What a great way to be introduced to Canada, hey?
Yeah, we had some do some of our summer camps, and they learned so much, and our kids learned so much. And you know, we had all the, like, we had interpreters in place, and you know, all the structure, and we found that we didn't need it because the kids just learned from each other. And I think it's going to be a really interesting year for those kids.
I know it can be amazing the way children can pick up, you know, languages of dance. So and actually literal languages. I mean, so quickly, and that's such a rich experience, you know, for everyone involved.
Yeah, we're learning from
them by design. I see we have everybody back. So welcome back to the CanNatyam online symposium. We're talking about things that can make traditional dance presentations better, and I find it interesting to reflect on the world around us and how migratory we are and how people are moving so much, and to have dance and places of art be focal points or gathering points for new people to enter into, I think is like a very good place to explore acceptance. How do we find acceptance in different community environments, and how do we find our tribes? And so joining us on this panel, we're together here in one room, all of us, in our straight line circle. And joining us are Darka Tarnowski, representing the Shunka dancers, and Justin Manyfingers. Thank you so much for joining off their performances. So thank you to everybody who has spoken and joined this conversation today. We really appreciate you being here. I think there's a lot of people in Edmonton who are keen to learn about what we're talking about and what the landscape is for people who want to join this dance space. So I look forward to our conversation that's being recorded and shared to reach as many people as possible, to help everybody who wants to get involved to get their foot in the door and learn about how they can participate. So why don't we jump right in, Darka, and share your experience with us of Shumka as you were describing the challenges that you've been experiencing and overcame, and maybe give us some insight with your long history of working with this group, that what kind of trends do you see for the world of dance presentation in the coming 3 to 5 years?
Well, thank you, Shrila. I was really excited when I was approached to be part of this. this discussion of where do we fit in and where does our art fit in is something that is within the walls of Shumka on an ongoing basis. Are we a Ukrainian dance company? Are we a Canadian dance company? Or are we a Ukrainian Canadian dance company? And what should we be focusing on? The preservation of the art form, the promotion of it, the development. So that's kind of how I looked at this discussion. Pre-COVID, I was mentioning at the break, was a time when we were about to embark on our 60th anniversary as an organization. And as we were getting ready for that, we were talking about sort of slogans or themes or images that would be a good fit to represent that 60 years of development. And we kept coming back to maple leaves. And that's for obvious reasons, for the Canadian connection. But when you go for a walk in downtown Kyiv in the fall, there are beautiful maple leaves all over the cobblestone streets, and because they have so many of those trees. And it always reminds me of how connected we are with our roots in our Ukrainian community. So how we sort of look at it is, we found a quote from Victor Hugo, actually, which says, "Change your leaves, keep intact your roots." And to us, that's what we do. We are rooted in Ukrainian dance. We are rooted in the traditions that are in Ukraine and where they came from. But we change our leaves with every new production that we do in different ways. And to us, that's very important. There are several really amazing Ukrainian dance companies in Edmonton, throughout North America, around the world. And a lot of them are their expertise is presenting regional dance, very authentic traditional dance, and they're very good at it. And so that's their niche. But our niche is really more about developing the art form. And we don't want to be a museum piece. We're not good enough to be a museum piece of what Ukrainian dance is. But our sort of long-standing mission as an organization has been to preserve, promote, and develop Ukrainian dance as part of the Canadian cultural mosaic. And the develop part is, I think, our most important area of focus currently when we're creating work. So we're based in tradition, but we've really developed a Ukrainian Canadian art form. We'd like to have some relevance to what's going on around us. And that's sort of in response not only to art making and constantly moving the art forward, but it's also about trying to bring new audiences into our work and to see it and to feel some sort of connection to it. So if we look at the Ukrainian side of things, when we're creating a new work, we always have to focus on what is that nugget or that base or that root. And there always has to be something from the Ukrainian cultural side of things for us. So it could be the lexicon of the movement. It could be regional choreography. It could be regional design elements. There's a number of different regions throughout Ukraine, and they have different sort of themes and looks and color use, etc. So we would like to latch on to some of those things. Are they based on a Ukrainian story or a folk tale or something from the past? Are there traditions within the storytelling that we're doing? So, for example, when we do our Nutcracker, we do it with a number of Ukrainian traditions integrated into it, like Ukrainian Christmas carolers and a lot of design elements that focus on Ukrainian Christmas. It could be musical influences. So there's got to be something that kind of hangs on to that Ukrainian cultural side of it. But then on the Canadian side, we tend to get a bit production heavy, I do admit. And we look at things like projections sets, complex lighting designs, things to help us make the story a bit more contemporary visually, to make it more universal, perhaps, so that people can relate to it from a number of different backgrounds. Sometimes we'll look at our costumes and get them designed so that they're much more practical. An example of that is our Ukrainian hopak costumes that the girls wear. When I danced in the 1980s, we had layers upon layers of very thick material with velvet and weavings, etc., that we wore because they were traditional, but they didn't work well with the movement. They were heavy, they were hot, they were difficult to dance in. Now our hopak costumes have sides that open up on the skirts for the girls and that have different sort of geometric patterns on them for the visual, but they're more practical, they're lighter, the girls can move in them. And we do get pushback from some of our community on that, that we're taking something very traditional and making it more contemporary. But to me, if we don't have any sort of feedback like that, we're not pushing the envelope enough. I feel like we always have to be kind of pushing it forward a bit. And art should be controversial at times, you know, whether it's about a costume and a skirt that is very different than, you know, what it was years ago. We also look at things like relevance and storytelling. So one of the most important pieces to me that I was ever involved in Shunka is the development of ancestors and elders, which is a piece we did with the Indigenous community. And the work on that took us probably a year longer than we had thought it would take, because we realized we needed to take the time to make sure we were telling the right stories. And what we really wanted to focus on at first was the relationship between the Indigenous people in Alberta and the first immigrants that came from Ukraine to Canada just over 130 years ago. And there was a very positive and communal relationship. The Ukrainian people came here and were put into these areas that they didn't know how to live in. They didn't know which berries or which leaves were, you know, could be used medicinally. They didn't know how to stay warm in the winter. And their Indigenous neighbors helped them out in many ways. And so we wanted to tell that story. But we also had to tell the story of residential schools. And that was difficult for us because we tend to have very sort of happy celebratory work. But we had to do that because we knew it was so important. It would be remiss and a really big mistake if we didn't. And so it took us some time to do that together as artists and as creators, to be able to do that in the right way and to make it relevant to our communities and to Canada. So that was one of the most sort of collaborative projects we've ever done that was very Canadian to us. Another piece that we're touring right now is called Mosquito's Wedding, and it's based on a Ukrainian folk song, and it's very well known from when we were young kids. We all knew that song, we knew the story, we knew the fairy tale. It's about a mosquito and a fly that fall in love and that kind of thing. But we changed the story a little bit and made it more relevant and made it about overcoming stereotypes and expectations of genders and different types of love. And it's been accepted on so many levels, from children to families to older people in our Ukrainian community who may have been challenged by some of the messages that we were presenting there. But again, it's something about being relevant. I think the one piece that I still question, did we go too far at the time, was in 1995, we contracted Brian Webb to work on a piece for us and with us called Night of Perun. And Perun was a god, a pagan god. And the whole piece was all about ritual and sacrifice before Christianity. And so it was quite different storytelling and material than we normally would deal with, and movement and music and all of those things. But it's part of our history, but it's just not part of our history that most Ukrainian dance groups would work with or would present. And I think it was quite controversial. We had some people leaving during the show. Interestingly enough, the people who were most supportive of it were people in the clergy in the Ukrainian Orthodox and Catholic churches who stayed for those shows and were very proud that we were able to present that important part of our history. There's still, we still talk about, did we go too far? And it took us some time to gain back the support of the Ukrainian Canadian community when we toured again, because they stayed away because they were afraid of what we were going to do. So it can hurt us in some ways, but at the same time, I think relevance is extremely important, and telling stories that are beyond just the movement and just traditional movement. The next work we're working on is called Lesya Ukrainka, and she is a poet, very similar to Taras Shevchenko, who are very iconic poets in our history. They are leaders that we look to, and they're from the 1800s. And Lesya was a famous poet. She was an artist. She was a playwright, and she was a suffragette, essentially. I kind of call her the Frida Kahlo of Ukraine. She was physically very ill most of her life. She had severe illnesses, but she lived her life vicariously through her characters, through her stories. And she developed a lot of very sort of significant pieces in our history. And she was also a very strong woman, known for her strength in a time when that wasn't a thing, So we're very excited about this piece because the Ukrainian community knows of her, but most of the non-Ukrainian community does not. But there's a lot of relevancy to her story. And so that's something that we're working on. It'll be traditional in some sense because it will be telling her story. It'll be historic, but it'll have a very contemporary look. It'll have lyrical movement. It will have contemporary movement, and of course, Ukrainian dance as well. But we like to, use a combination of those dance forms. In our school, I mentioned our school just before the session started. So we have over 230 students right now. We have a syllabus that we created over the last 20 years or so that we've just recently updated as well, and that we give access to across Canada and the States if groups want to use the syllabus. But it's not just Ukrainian dance. It's Ukrainian dance, it's character dance, it's Ukrainian traditional steps and lexicon. But we also have classes in contemporary movement. We have a number of classes in RAD ballet as the basis of the movement. And we have we have a lot of sort of dramaturgy opportunities as well for our young dancers, so that they can be prepared coming up into the ranks of an organization like Shunka or other groups that do similar things. In one of the pre-documents that I received from Srila about this panel, there was a reference to how we see ourselves compared to something like Shen Yun, the classical Chinese production. And I went to see the show the last time it was here, and there were more similarities than I had expected. There's lots of stage tricks, there's lots of acrobatics, it's lots of when we look back, when I look back over the history, there have been other collaborations that have happened for sure. The one thing that is important to us as well is that we feel as a school and as a company that we are not just made up of Ukrainian dancers. We are made up of dancers who come from different backgrounds. We have people who have no Ukrainian dance background who come and audition for the company, and who will then take supplementary classes and learn what they need to do to be able to perform the shows. But some of them bring a lot of ballet training or contemporary movement or lyrical movement, and we cast them accordingly. But we've got people who are Filipino, who are African Canadian, who are Irish, and they have no Ukrainian background at all. But we're seeing more and more people who are outside of our community that are joining the ensemble and our school as well, which we're really thrilled about. One other thing I just wanted to talk about just quickly was just some of the barriers of touring. The barriers of touring for us is that we're a large company, and what we do is large dance, right? So we're talking 40 to 50 people. So we need big theaters, lots of seats to sell. It's expensive to tour. We've had lots of audience issues with our last tour, just people afraid of the COVID situation. I think people have new lifestyle patterns and are buying tickets really at the last moment. They don't want any to be committed. And then with the war in Ukraine, there's been a large focus on fundraising events and concerts in our community. And so I think people are a little bit burnt out from our culture, to be honest. But there's good reason that we're having all of those events, of course. We also feel that it's difficult to get into being presented by dance presenters. We've had success with Camrose, the Lougheed Center for Performing Arts. We've had success with Dance Victoria. We've done our Nutcracker there a few times, and they've been extremely supportive. But we're finding that the larger theaters are skeptical because they see us as having only a Ukrainian audience, which is not the case. So we're looking at smaller shows and smaller theaters because I think they're more open to presenting groups like us. And the other thing is just the funding of these types of tours, the circulation and touring grants at Canada Council. I'm thrilled to say that after 4 attempts, we got a touring grant from Canada Council as of last week, but it took us 4 times. Fourth time is a charm, I guess. And every time we were rejected, I would speak to the officer and they'd give us some hints and we would deal with it. And so we, you know, made the application better and better and better. But it was a thrill for us to finally be recognized by Canada Council with that funding. And without that funding, it would be a very difficult tour for us to do financially. So we're thrilled with that. And then in terms of marketing, it's that whole thing of, you know, grassroots versus mainstream marketing. Do we need to stick to our Ukrainian community, or how much do we invest in mainstream marketing without throwing that money away? It's difficult. And I think by doing more sort of collaborative work, we can introduce our audiences to each other and to each other's work. So I think that that's important moving forward. So that's kind of what I have to say about this. If I've missed any sort of major areas you wanted me to talk about, or if anybody has any questions.
Maybe then, as you're thinking about questions or popping them in the chat, let's open the floor to Justin. Justin Manyfingers, you've studied in both Western and Indigenous performing art forms for the past 10 years throughout Canada and around the world. You've worked with elders like Narcisse Blood, Albion Mountain Horse, and Beverly Hungry Wolf. Do you want to add to Darka's story and tell us about your journey as a dancer in the spaces where you traditionally perform, and what we as an audience need to do to understand what you're sharing? And then maybe afterwards we can just open it up to questions and comments. How does that sound?
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's so much that that you brought up, Derka. My brain is kind of all over the place as we're looking at the new world of arts and culture and tradition, and how we disseminate that, right? There are so many barriers, not only with dance, but I think culture and performance and spaces. Since I've had my time of my independent career as actor, dancer, singer, and shifting into producing, creating, directing, writing, you know, it was a bit challenging to kind of navigate, because I didn't quite feel like my work fit in a specific place. It was, and I think that's also due to the amount of training and mentorship, and you know, what I've learned over the years of my art and my craft and self-expression that is deep rooted into the Blackfoot culture. So I'm coming to you now in Treaty 7 territory, which is comprised of the Blackfoot Confederacy with the 4 nations, and you know, the Stoney Nakoda, Morley Reserve, and Tsuut'ina Reserve, the Dene Reserve just outside of Calgary. You know, kind of fast forwarding my independent career and shifting more into arts leadership and management, and taking on the role of making Treaty 7 Culture Society, where I was the artistic director for about 2 years up until COVID. You know, it was very interesting, because our leaders, both the cultural leader and the brain mastermind behind making Treaty 7, had passed away, you know, halfway through our high success of the creation and the story of when we made treaty back in 1877. So kind of taking on that leadership and being, you know, a new emerging artist through that journey with the company. It wasn't even a company then. It was just that time and space that we needed to tell those stories. Indigenous arts is a very hard door to get into mainstream or current art spaces within Alberta. I find that it's very new, Indigenous arts. And what does that even mean? So looking at that and being with Making Treaty 7 and looking at our audience and outreach and creating shows and pushing those boundaries of what can we do next? So when I was at Making Treaty 7, I said, well, let's do a season. You know, let's see what we can do. Let's look at all types of, you know, both local, national, international. And so part of building that season, you know, it took a lot of partnerships with Calgary to develop that, and a lot of community support and artists from all over. But in doing that, it was so bizarre that we, in the midst of developing this season, it had been the first Indigenous season to be curated and run by an Indigenous company in the history of Alberta. And so that was in 2018-19 season, or is it 1920? I'm so far behind the world since COVID, but you know, it's been recent. But looking at that and looking at the ticket sales and the shows we had, you know, we had, you know, traditional shows from Mexico, you know, we had local from, you know, Blackfoot stories. You know, we had such a variety of different types of performance and that outreach within that. And the ticket sales so varied, you know, it was, I literally had to start thinking, it's like, okay, for the organization to survive, do we now need to look at developing, let's say a show, a Pocahontas show with Alberta Ballet? You know, how do we get those large ticketed numbers, and how much do we have to compromise of what Alberta still thinks of Indigenous culture, people, and where it's at, and how does Indigenous art look to the Indigenous, to the non-Indigenous audience within Alberta and the other surrounding communities? If we go very traditional and we just start developing these productions or performances of different types of medium backgrounds, and we focus specifically to the reserve, well, the exposure to ballet, the exposure to contemporary dance, to the exposure to Indigenous contemporary dance, you know, is so limited within the Indigenous communities within Alberta. I'm not saying that they don't like it. It's very foreign and it's very different. And that goes again back to the root of, you know, since the contact of European views and a lot of these. So it's, you know, it's very challenging as an organization or a producing person of who is your audience, you know, and what is that looking like? You know, bringing those shows to the communities, you're not really going to bank on ticket sales within that, right? But you're going to get a huge audience. So where do you then kind of stand, and how do you compromise, and how do you kind of cross over the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, you know, and audiences to start to look at this, and how do we generate very successful outcomes of what we're trying to disseminate at this point in time. You know, looking at even the Indigenous arts community and the Indigenous audience, you know, when you tell one story, we're still looking at, you know, when I say Blackfoot, when you say Indigenous, it's so broad, right? It's looking at, you know, over 150, you know, Indigenous specific cultures. Yes, we are all Indigenous, but we are so rooted into the ceremonies, to the language, to the process of how we as people survive and move forward with our culture and what we have left. we have, Mohawk, we have Ojibwe, a lot of these, and we have also over 500 different dialects across this part of Turtle Island, the northern part. So when we even look at Treaty 7, well, we have the 4 reserves, and so they do things a bit differently, even though we are all Blackfoot, right? So it's having to look at so many things that is not quite there yet in terms of performance and that. And so, now leaving Making Treaty 7 and being independent and kind of having this time to go back into learning and going back into school for, last year and for the next 2 years as I, start and finish my MFA. Being invited by the University of Calgary to do this MFA is the work I've been doing for the last 8 years in terms of developing a process of my work. So coming from a Blackfoot culture, it was very bizarre for me to look at performance and performing arts as acting school and dance school and music conservatory. They're so isolated from one another that they, you can't get a dancer to speak on stage. It's hard to get a dancer, to get an actor to feel comfortable inside of their body and to really move within that. Not saying all, but the majority of it that's relevant within it, right? So looking at these different things, it didn't make sense because the culture I come from has all of that. Every song has a dance, every dance tells a story, every story has a song, right? It's continuously in motion within that. And even within the language itself, the Blackfoot language, it's always describing something in motion. I always use the example of a cup. When you say it in Blackfoot, we're not referring to a cup. In Blackfoot, if we were to say, how do you say cup in Blackfoot? The elder would come back and, tell you the Blackfoot word. And then you say, well, how would you translate that back into English? So then the cup that is almost lifeless then becomes a translation from Blackfoot into the thing that holds the life source. So then we're looking at something that's so much rooted into an object. So that object has meaning, it has life, it has purpose. So looking at performance, it's hard for me to say, am I a dancer? Am I a singer? Am I an actor? Am I a storyteller? The culture I grew up in had all of that. Well, if it was private ceremony, that's not for presentation. And then you have the ceremonies that are for presentation that include more of a relaxed atmosphere. And then you have powwow that everyone kind of knows. So you have different levels of tradition and being traditional artist. Now we're looking at Western techniques and Indigenous techniques that is now a hybrid of what we know of Indigenous contemporary art in whatever medium that is, right? So, there's again a lot to look at and kind of focusing it back into Alberta and the resources we have. I feel that if we start to look at our current partnerships around and those spaces that we need, how can we then be allies? When I was working within Calgary and, working with Lunchbox, when I was working with the harmonic, the orchestra, Calgary Orchestra, all these different companies that are different areas, it wasn't about trying to take their audience. It was asking if you can introduce us to your audience so that you're also able to present Indigenous works, whatever medium that may be of art forms. And, looking at that, we don't even have a history of ticket sales and what works and what doesn't work. So I ended up calling, Alberta Theater Projects and say, this is going to sound bizarre coming from another company, could you give us your record and your history of presenting any Indigenous work? Because I wanted to look at what Alberta knew before me, the ones who, pushed these works before I came into the scene within Calgary. And looking at those ticket sales, well, how much did you sell your tickets for? What was your audience count? Is there anyone here to look at Was there any Indigenous outreach within marketing? What was your Indigenous marketing strategy? Was it Indigenous, non-Indigenous audience? How long did your shows run? You know, because we had zero database of what this was. And so then again, was looking at the smaller companies, and looking at even like high performance rodeo, and was like, would you be able to help us? Because I can't even program anything, because I don't know the scale of it, and I don't know how much money is here, or how much we can, or what we can go after within that, right? And you know, the arts community really supported making Treaty 7 and going from this shift to telling this large, important story of the making of Treaty 7 to then switching it into a Indigenous performing arts company, you know, and getting a residency at the Grand, you know, when all that crap, you know, started going down. I said, I want to get into that building. I want that office. I want that space, because I think Indigenous arts deserves a space. And so if a space like that has that, how do we infiltrate back into a westernized arts community? And we were very fortunate. We are the second Indigenous, the companies, sorry, I still talk like I work there. They are still a resident company there, but they are the second Indigenous company to have residency in all of Canada. So how do we start to work towards that, right? How do we then, you know, get our community to come into these theaters? Because again, you know, since, you know, residential schools and the, you know, suppression of our culture and our language, something that was so rich and vibrant in its dances and its songs and its, you know, language, it's not even on the reserve. I'm speaking to you now on the reserve. And if I were to have this conversation with someone on the reserve, their lack of information and exposure would completely push them away. So how do we use that language with that culture to then identify the resistance to the arts we're trying to offer these communities? And how do we market within the language they understand currently to help our audience, Indigenous audience, especially within reserves, to put in all of this effort to explain what we're doing and what we want to show with them? You know, looking again, I'm going to refer back to making Treaty 7. When we first started creating the show, we had so much support, but we had to give the tickets away for free, because, you know, the furthest reserve, which is where I'm from, is 2.5 hours away. The income and the job opportunity and is so low. Can they pay that gas? Can they find a vehicle to get to Calgary? Can they afford to pay this ticket? How many people are they going to come with? A lot of people don't have drivers. They need to find someone who has drivers and a vehicle, you know. And how do you do that? So we said, you know what, just give the tickets away, just give them away for free. They can reserve them so that they don't make a trip for nothing. And we had this huge tent at the historic part of Calgary. I'm forgetting the name, my apologies. But we had such a great turnout because someone knew someone of their family who was in that production, or someone's grandpa was a part of all this information they gave all these artists, or we were going to recognize these elders. And so it was such a communicative opportunity for everyone when this whole launch, and that's what kind of really made that success. But, you know, Michael Green was literally going to reserves and literally driving to houses on the reserves, any house, randomly walking up and started knocking on the door. Here's, you know, this white guy on the reserve, you know, one of the town sites with the big nose and the crazy hair, and saying, hey, I'm from Calgary. Do you want to come see a Making Treaty 7 show? Or do you know any information? You know, but it really took, you know, someone to really do that as an ally, to go into these reserves, to start to literally go door to door, literally door to door within these communities. And so again, looking at marketing and how we start to approach that, you know, how do we do that? What are our resources? Who are who are our marketing resource people who have that experience? How do you get into the local newspaper? How do you get into that local native radio station that's on the reserve? You know, how do you do that? And who is there? You know, you can have someone, a great marketer in public relations in a city, but do they know that community? Do they know those avenues and those telephone lines and those people where we can start disseminating all this information? Breaking it down, almost no one. When I was at Making Treaty 7, I literally had to bring a public relations and marketer and team them up with someone who knew almost everyone from every other reserve and knew all these resources and where to put the information. And together they worked together to start to disseminate and put out all of our work out there within the communities. Striking the time. Sorry, maybe I should stop there for now. I'm very scattered today. I've had a lot of coffee because this was early Saturday for me, but I'll stop it for there. I hope I was able to contribute to this conversation within that. But again, yes, thank you for having me and having me a part of this. And it is very important that other non-white minorities within Alberta team up together. And how do we do this together? How can we get Ukraine dance, on a reserve? A lot of Indigenous people don't really know about Ukraine other than what's happening since the war started. So wouldn't that be so fascinating to have someone, again, it's that exposure to other cultures. And, for me, finish on one last thing. When I started studying in Toronto, what really opened up my eye was being exposed to so many cultures within Toronto that their culturalistic points that triggered something within me led me to question, that looks familiar, that sounds familiar. What is that purpose? Understanding that purpose that then reflected back to me and said, how, do we do something like that? Do we dance because of this as well? So it started making me question my own culture. And I think that's the importance of cross-cultural partnerships, is what is that common line between both cultures? Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Justin, we have a question from Amy who says, I'm curious, who do you want your audience to be, and what do you want them to understand from your performance?
For me, I think it depends on the context of the performance and who I want that performance to reach. Am I going to be telling a Napi story, our trickster? Well, I would like to gear that more towards my community and bringing back those communicative stories of Napi and the Rock, of how Okotoks became Okotoks, the city of Okotoks. It's actually Okodok or Okodoki. So if I were to look at that and not be in the Rock and how that all happened, well then, I want to bring, a theatrical performance that will engage within the young people within the schools, but also I would like to bring that to Okotoks, because I think a lot of people in Okotoks don't even know that Okotok stems from a Blackfoot word of Okodok, which means rock, or Okodoki, which means rocks, plural within that. So, I think, yeah, based on the contextual artistry and story of what the specific project is trying to reach that. But you can get lost if you're trying to do this one and do a different show very later, and then you're having to, go into different areas. Yeah. I hope that
I
answers the
think
question.
I think what you've been saying, I mean, it really resonates with me about not having no history of ticket sales and the need to build partnerships and allies, um, and how much we have to compromise when we present our work, because you have to dumb it down, as it were, for like the most basic of audiences. But if you want to have a wider reach, I think you will be willing to bend as much as you can. And that we really do need some allies working and boots on the ground. And we need to have maybe like a central village where we can. I know that that growing up, we used to have, you know, CTV have a channel that actually allowed different cultures to witness each other in a village square program. Um, and I'm not seeing so much of that anymore. I did have an interesting experience with the Indigenous community when we talk about like ritual and culture, being present or being invited to be present at a Hindu temple in a sharing of a sacred ritual experience together. And it was their first time to be exposed to the Indigenous community that wasn't political or, you know, in a public space. It was just community to community. And that community building opportunity was so, it was such a positive experience and an unexpected one. Nobody knew what to expect. They came in with all kinds of preconceived notions, and there was all kinds of cultural awkwardness from organizing it to having it come out. But after it was over, there was such a feeling of togetherness, that we actually do share something in common, and it connected everybody in the room, and they've been craving for a repeat of that, but there's never enough resources to do it again or reciprocate it. It just kind of trailed away into our memories, and so we look forward to having it happen again. And I think that happens with every two communities that intersect with each other, that nobody knows going into it what it's going to be like, but coming out of it at the other end, it's like, boy, I'm sure glad we had this experience. There should be more people here to enjoy this because it was amazing. So I open the floor to any more questions. I see another one. This is from Mark. How might outreach in schools prepare people to embrace the arts of Indigenous and other peoples? And I want to add to that, how might outreach in other community gathering places help to prepare people to embrace the arts of Indigenous and other peoples? And I open this up to both our panelists. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, so one of the things was what we were doing at Making Treaty 7 was we got asked to go into schools a lot, and I'm not sure about the partnership, but there was a company in Calgary, Quest Theatre, who had Theatre for Young People version of the Making Treaty 7 show within that. But also we had other schools, whether that was, you know, in kindergarten to, you know, college, university level. But what we did is that we brought First Nations teachers to come and start to be a part of the company. And they would then develop a little curriculum for the either specific classroom or for within the school, because there's some good ticket sales if you can get a whole school there for matinee. That's always great to have. But yeah, so they would kind of, based on the grade or level of education that was going to be attending, we had them sit in rehearsals. We invited the educators to come in and sit with us and sit with the artists and mingle and chat and expose them to the arts world again. So that was a great thing that we started developing, and that I still am trying to look at to develop, is how do we use those resources within the community, whether it's a Blackfoot teacher, an educator who's First Nations, but also who teaches Blackfoot culture, Blackfoot history, and get them to develop a curriculum based on that. So whether if it's an Indigenous school or non-Indigenous school or other school that has a lot of people of color, and what's the importance of the performance we're trying to get to create a little curriculum a day before. Look for this Blackfoot word. How many times was that said? What's a little essay going into the show, and what have you learned coming out of it? And so it was just more of like an Easter egg hunt that was given.
Sorry, I thought that I was unmuted.
Darka, I was wondering how social media has been helpful in sharing some of these educational aspects of cross cultures.
It's been really important. We use social media a lot to try to get people to in the door, essentially, of what we're doing. I remember years ago, we would never ever show like a rehearsal or something that wasn't totally ready to be on stage. And now that is the type of thing that we're trying to do more of, so that people can relate to it, so they can feel an entry point, so that it gives them something to hang on to. And I think that's really important. And with what Justin was saying about the student matinees, we do the same thing, and we find them so valuable, because then going to see a Ukrainian dance show, in our case, is kind of like a normal thing for those kids, and they accept it as part of their world, when they get that sort of exposure. So I think having outreach in schools or opportunities for students to see different work is so key to the future of what we do.
We really need more boots on the ground opportunities or resources to be able to put people into the streams of education and community development and community work, just to keep people on the pulse of what's happening, because there is also so much going on and there's so many cultures that who are competing for dance spaces. Should we, before we wrap this up, should we talk a little bit about just how competitive this space is? Do you feel that?
I don't feel it as competitive. I think it's actually strengthening for the whole multicultural community to have more dance and more collaboration and more performances and more educational opportunities from a variety of backgrounds. I think it's strengthening, and it's less competitive.
I would say, yeah, I don't think it's so much competitive, but I think it's really pushing the stress line and fracture line for arts organizations and its limitations. As an independent artist, it's great because everyone's still programming, you know, from my experience, Indigenous arts. But again, I think it's also, you know, kind of pushing that fine line of, are we kind of exhausting our audience? I think you said something about that, Derek, about there's just been so much, right? And so it's like, we don't want to tire out our audience that we currently have. But I think that's also, again, that whole stress point factor of trying to get more audience to join that audience, so that the current ones who have been those long timers who've been supporting for so long, you know, they take a break while we have this new audience. But yeah, so I think it kind of depends on when you look at independent to organizational. But yeah.
We have a question here. Can we give children more exposure on scale commensurate with diversity of culture in Alberta? Or in this area, meaning like the performance area? Is that what you meant, Mark?
Sorry, I'll just speak a little bit about the question. I mean, you know, you could say Edmonton, you could say Treaty 6, you could say Treaty 7, you could say Western Canada, you could say anything. When I was growing up, there was, and I saw it when I was a younger artist, there was systematic effort by the then Department of Culture to make sure that every child saw a play, every child saw this kind of dance, every child saw that kind of dance. And yes, they were limited and they were heavily European. With the society evolving the way that it is and the way that it was before European contact with all of the people here and all of the cultural richness, it strikes me that, you know, things would not be foreign, alien, and scary to people if they were actually sufficient outreach into the schools. And don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying any company is doing insufficient research, because I know outreach, because I know that everybody's doing everything that they can. But it seems to me that there needs to be some larger support somehow, you know, as a matter of principle of cultural sharing, cultural education, you know, exposure, knowing who knowing who we are, knowing who our neighbors are, knowing who we define as both we and our neighbors, knowing and you know, experiencing the stories that are important to them and the way that they tell them. It seems to me that should be basic in a multicultural society. It should be, and I think that it's something that we as arts organizations, yeah, sure, we have more time to lobby. You know, I mean, everyone's exhausted. However, it does seem to me that one of the great holes in Alberta, specifically Alberta's cultural policy, is the lack of educational touring funding. Whether that's, you know, we give this funding at the end of things like we used to, you know, you would go and do a school tour and then you would get some money, or whether it's up front, whether it's rotating curators from different cultural backgrounds with the Department of Culture, so it's centralized or something. But it seems that it's, and maybe this is just me maybe this is post-COVID fatigue for me. You know, we reached, I don't know, 8,000 people across Canada with wonderful show Creature in the Dark, wonderful shadow puppet show, you know, during the pandemic. And we can't actually contact Edmonton Public Schools, no one can, about our programming any way other than by mail, direct mail. So it almost feels, and I know this is being recorded, but oh well, it sometimes feels like there's a kind of a war on culture. even though everybody talks about how important it is, it you know, there's a degradation that has happened in our educational system that is not trivial and will come back to haunt us. And fortunately, we may have a change of government. And if we do, I think that that is a huge opportunity to say to them, okay, let's look what we used to have that was good in the Lougheed era, and let's make that more inclusive. And maybe throw some of it out. Who knows? Sorry, I did not mean to go on so long. I was actually asking a question. And I wonder what other people think of the things that I've said or that I originally posed.
Well, it's interesting you bring up cancel culture.
Well, I wasn't talking about cancel culture. I was talking about like Philistine war on culture. Cancel culture, you know, I understand why it exists and it's problematic and it's useful at the same time. I'm talking more about schools saying, no, get out of here with that culture. Like a parochial, Philistine, closed-minded attitude, right? That's what I'm talking about. That has taken hold.
I think that maybe we need to sit back and think about that a little bit. And we want to come back together again on October 22nd. So I hope you can join us again at that time. We'll be sending out links of the live performances that we're going to hold for CanNatyam on September 30th and October 2nd to see how they match up to the points that we're raising today. And then in that session, we can revisit some of these topics again. This session has been recorded, and these links will be available both online at Thousand Faces and Alberta Dance Alliance websites and channels. We may be able to expand this conversation. I'd like to thank you, Dark and Justin, for joining us in this. We are trying to launch this South Asian Classical Dance Festival, and we felt that it was important to do it with a national framework because we're not just a local community anymore. The world has shrunk, and there are people across the planet that that are curious about what Canada is and what Canadians do and who is Canadian today. And so you help to expand our vision of what is possible in this country. And I look forward to seeing you live in person at the performances if you're able to see it, but you can definitely catch it online. And thank you everybody for being in this room and participating in this conversation because it's an important one to continue to have so that we can, with this awareness, now we can build alliances with each other and work together to make sure at least that people know about what's happening, what performances are taking place, and as Bobby is saying, shift and change will need greater funding and resources. So we have, you're equipping us with information to take to administrators or people who hold the to say what it is that people need to live where they are. So thank you again for joining us today and having me be your host. I will conclude this session if unless there's something somebody else would like to add.
I just wanted to say, as a presenter for this, a co-presenter and co-host for this session, that I just really appreciate everyone's thoughts and ideas. And as I said at the beginning, the purpose of this is to just listen and hear. And with any luck down the road, this kind of research, as it expands outward, will allow us to create some positioning documents that may be able to be utilized to make some of that shifts, some of those shifts and changes, because as I have said over and over again, I think there's a real inequity for traditional and cultural dance groups that have not been given the same playing fields of development that other forms have, which is fine, it makes sense, but it's time. I mean, I just look at Canadian presenters. We have a Canadian presenters organization, but I know there is no one on there that represents specifically traditional dance. So there are good discussions to be had as we come, and I hope people can come back during our, I guess what we call it, a tie-up, Shrila. I hope everybody can come back. And again, I just really want to thank Shrila for her support, and certainly Mark for having us come into this festival and work with them, and also our staff, Tamana and Aiden, for helping us to stay somewhat on a technological platform without completely blowing up. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and my thanks and the thanks of the Thousand Faces Festival to you, Bobby, and to the ADA for making this possible, for expanding the possibilities within this, and to all the panelists to hear the stories of the struggles and the triumphs is inspiring. Sometimes we get siloed, and hearing your perspectives has been invaluable. Hearing it from everyone has been invaluable. So thank you all very much.
And thank you. And we hope to see you spread the word of our September 30th opening show. See you soon. Thank you, everybody.